Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Evil Safety News. I am your host, Mr. Aaron Isino, the Director of Risk Management for IBC. And this is our podcast where we get to talk about anything and everything that has to do with risk. If it's a risk or a safety issue for an individual, an employee, a people group, a nation, a state, a country, doesn't matter how big, how small, if it's a threat, if it's a safety issue, if it's a risk, we get to talk about it on this show. And this is episode 197. As always, everybody, please remember to like, rate, subscribe, share, and leave a positive review. I am going to jump right into our guest because I'm so excited. Pastor Doug Reed, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited to talk with you because we're both pastors. We're both pro-Israel. We're both involved in Jewish-Christian relations. And so it's just like awesome to talk to a kindred spirit who just kind of gets it and is doing it. And it's just an honor to have you on the show.
Absolutely. And I believe you had Rabbi Pesach out at your church not that long ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. It wasn't last November. It was one before that. And
Okay.
then I got him on the show too. So
Beautiful.
Now I got the pair. I got both of the hosts shoulder to shoulder. So let's talk about that for a second. You're the pastor at the Tabernacle in Buffalo, New York. So that's
Correct.
awesome. And you're there with Bishop Robert Stearns.
Correct.
So that's awesome. And then also you are the co-host of Shoulder to Shoulder, and it's a podcast about, matters that are current events that people of faith should care about. And your co-host is, as we just said, Rabbi Pesach Wolicki.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've been doing the podcast a little over 2 years now, or coming up on 2 years. It'll be 3 years this summer. Yeah, a little over 2 years. And we've been here in Buffalo about 18 months. And before that, I served at a church in Ohio for 9 years as senior pastor. And then I was a youth pastor for a decade in New Jersey before that.
Wow.
God's good. And I love what I get to do. I love being on podcasts, Christian TV, all that sort of stuff. And getting to preach week in and week out to our congregation is incredible too.
And you just preached yesterday, right?
I did.
That's cool. That's awesome. So let's talk about a little bit more of your kind of history. How did you get involved in Jewish-Christian relations? Because, I've been a pastor for a long time, and it's not like a common thing. It's not like, it's not just something you meet every fifth pastor, It's really kind of rare. I think it's becoming more common, thank God. But how did you get involved in it?
Sure. So mine came through a spiritual dad. I had started as a new senior pastor, new lead pastor in Ohio. My wife and I were 28 and 26, had no idea what we were doing, but God handed us the keys to a church there in Youngstown called Bridge of Hope. It's a great church. They were excited for us to come and bring some young new life to the church. So we stepped into that, but I was like, I need a mentor bad. And so I cold called some people. I took some guys to coffee and to lunch and felt like I was kind of striking out. I met some nice pastors, some guys 10, 20, 30, 40 years older than me, but I didn't feel like it clicked. And then I met Bishop David Thomas from Victory Christian Center, and he just became immediately, there was just a connection that wasn't there with anybody else. And he began pouring into my life. We had one meeting actually and shared story, felt good. I sent him a handwritten note thanking him for the meeting. And then the next thing that he invited me to, he said, hey, I'm having a little gathering of some leaders. Now his church was 8 campuses, 5,000 people. He pastored it for 42 years up till recently. And he invited me to this little gathering in their cafe. And he said, it'll be about a dozen to 20 leaders from the area. And I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. And the very first thing he ever invited me to, I walked through the door and in walks Robert Stearns to talk about a Celebrate Israel event.
All right.
They were gonna do a Youngstown Celebrates Israel. And I was like, what in the world is this? And I saw some videos and some other stuff. And as far as I was concerned, Israel happened 5,000 years ago or was 5,000 miles away. It wasn't going to help the single mom sitting in my church trying to figure things out. So, on one hand, it was nice, it was all those things, but on the other hand, it wasn't pragmatic or practical, so it didn't seem to concern me. Sure, would I go on a trip to Israel? I would love to do that and get to Bible geek out a little bit, but realistically, it was not top of my priority list. It wasn't something that was fostered in Bible school or any of that. And so here I find myself in this meeting with, arguably the most pro-Zionist Christian that I know, in Robert Stearns, and he gets up and says, "Hey, we've done this in Nashville, we've done this here, and we want to do it here in Youngstown." And I was like, okay, whatever, and left. And a couple months go by, and then I get get Eagles Wings reached out to me to say, "Hey, we're going to gather regional leaders now," and they had about 100 pastors, rabbis, business
Wow.
leaders come together for a luncheon to prep for this event. And so I show up to the event, and I was announced as part of the steering committee. And I said, "Oh,"
Oh,
I said, "I just got voluntold." I said, "That was very
that's how that
interesting."
goes.
And, in my mind, when I went to the lunch, I remember this vividly. I said to my secretary as I was leaving the office to go to the lunch, I said, I'm headed off to the Jewish Community Center for this Israel lunch. He goes, I said to her, I'm not even sure Israel's really my cup of tea, but, I'm going to go to this lunch. And so I went. They did very similar presentation that we got in a smaller version. And I was like, okay. And at that point, the church I was pastoring was on the smaller side. We didn't have a huge budget, but people are writing checks for, $5,000, to support this event. And I'm like, I got a nickel and a roll of duct tape. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna,
Yeah.
donate anything, but I'm like, I gotta at least be a sponsor. I can't be on the steering committee and not be a sponsor. So I filled out a form for a $250 little ad in the book and hoped that was going to be sufficient. And the event was April 15th of 2015. And my wife and I walked in. She was pregnant with our third. And we were unaware when we walked into this event, everybody was like decked out in suits and
Oh
ties.
man.
I have a suit and tie, and I call it my Mary and Barry because
Yeah, for sure.
you have to be in the casket or standing at the altar to see me in it. So it's not something I wear often, but we come in. I am in like a bomber jacket and Jordans and a t-shirt, and my wife is in like this maternity dress, flowy thing because she's pregnant. And
Right.
they have reserved seats for us in the second row. I'm sitting
Oh
directly
man.
behind Bishop Stearns, the ambassador, the consul general, like all the dignitaries. And I'm like, yep, I'm on the steering committee. Had no idea how to dress for this. And we walk in, there's 1,000 people in this church. And they're all waving Israeli flags and they're singing in Hebrew. At one point, I look at my wife and I'm like, what have we gotten ourselves into? I was like, Lord, if you get me out of this, I will serve you the rest of my life. I don't even know what this is. And so the event comes and goes, and we're like thinking, hey, we're just going to sneak out. And if you've ever had the privilege of meeting Bishop Stearns, he grabs us and just treats us like royalty. And so, while we were thinking about sneaking out because we felt underdressed and we felt unprepared for the event, he's introducing us to everybody like we're someone, and just making us feel incredibly special just for being there. And we connected in that space. And then fast forward another 8 or 9 months, the end of 2015, Christmas time, I get a text message from my spiritual dad who, navigated all of this relationship. And he just said, hey, Merry Christmas. Hope you and Sam have a wonderful Christmas and the kids. Just wanted to let you know, my friend Robert Stearns is putting together a group of young millennial up and coming leader pastors to go to Israel. And I gave him your name and contact info so he may call you. And I said, oh, that's so kind. And it was like a group text with about three or
Right.
four other pastors. And not to be whatever, he had 100 staff. He had 34 other pastors on his team. And I'm thinking like, well, if it comes down to it and he's got to pick, if I'm in that spot, I'm going to send somebody that's on my team. So I kind of shelved it, put it in the back of my mind and said, it probably won't happen, but it'd be cool. And, I'd love to go on a trip to Israel, but forgot about it. And fast forward about 3 weeks, I got a phone call from a New York number that I didn't know. So I ignored it, as you do. And, and that number then texted me and said, "Hey, this is Bishop Robert Stearns. Is this Doug Reed?" I
Wow.
said, "It is, Bishop. What can I do for you?"
Wow.
And he said, "You can come to Israel with me." And I said, "What?"
That's
And
cool.
he called me and gave me the information. And when he called, I said, "Hey, Bishop, so good to hear from you." He said, "Do you have a passport?" I said, "I do." And he said, "Okay." He goes, "We leave February 8th. This was January 23rd or
Oh,
22nd. He called me.
oh,
And I was like, "Oh." And he's like, "Look, it's all expenses paid." He's like, "You've been recommended, and I want to take you on this trip. There's going to be about 30 other pastors from all over the country. You got to go." And I said, "Well, I have 3 little babies and a wife. Can I have 24 hours just to get some things in order, talk to my wife before I confirm?" He says, "You got 24 hours." So that was at about 11 in the morning. Now, mind you, I'm in a small church context. We maybe were running 2016, we might have been running 160, 175 people, not a huge context. It was only myself and one other full-time pastor. And I had a couple of volunteer people that served in ministry. And then we had an administrator. So it wasn't a huge staff. And so if I'm out of the pulpit, they have to carry that and all of that. So my staff so graciously looked at me and was like, "Pastor, you're going on this trip."
oh, yeah.
My youth pastor, associate pastor, just a dear friend, Christian, looked at me and he was like, "Bro, if you don't go on this trip, I'm going to break your legs and shove you on the plane. Like, you have to go on this trip." And so the staff was like all 110% behind. And then I spent the afternoon practicing a speech for my wife, because how do you convince uh, 3 kids under the age of 4, in the middle of February in Ohio with snow and everything else, you're going to be without me for 10 days and I'm going to be, eating falafel and, and shawarma and just
Yep.
enjoying myself all around Israel. So how do you convince? And so, I had this whole speech prepared, and thank God that day we had a date scheduled for my wife and I. We were going to Ruby Tuesdays because we had a coupon. I remember that.
Nice.
And so I would get home 4 o'clock. The babysitter shows up. We get in the car, and I had preemptively called my wife and said, "Look, I've been invited on this trip. I have to make a decision tonight, so we need to talk about it." So she knew it was coming, and we get in the car, and you can feel it in the car. I'm like, "Oh, we're gonna have a conversation, aren't we?" And we start driving, and I get ready to launch into my speech as to why I should go on this trip. And before I can get a word out of my mouth, I get ready to launch in. She puts her hand up and she's like, "Listen, I know you're going. We just have to
Okay.
figure out how." And I
All
was
right.
like,
Hey,
"Yes,"
praise the Lord. Yep.
And yeah, we pulled into the Ruby Tuesday parking lot. I called Bishop Stearns. He sent me all the paperwork, and then we spent the rest of dinner and our date figuring out. All right, now mind you, it was February 8th to the 18th. My birthday's the 13th. Valentine's Day's the 14th. I had
Yep.
a I had a preschool father-daughter dance I was supposed to go to, and ministers retreat was like the 16th, 17th, 18th of that time or something like that. And so we had a bunch of stuff that was already planned, already in the works, and we were having to figure out how we were going to do that. And so graciously, my mother-in-law came up, and we had a number of friends and people that helped out. And so my wife was good, and I got on a plane for Israel from JFK to Tel Aviv, and that trip wrecked me. Is
Boom.
the best way to describe it. Like I remember landing, and I thought, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Going through the airport and customs, and you get in the bus, and almost immediately, we're in Tel Aviv, walking around, and like there's the port that Jonah left out of, and there's Simon the Tanner's house, and you're like immediately drinking from a fire hose, and it's just like incredible, and the atmosphere is electric, the food's incredible. And I thought I was going to go Bible geek out for, 10 days. And I'm like, this will be great. I'll get good preaching material. I was prepared to take a bunch of notes. And I'd even scheduled a Wednesday night teaching series when I came back, Lessons from Israel. I was, all pumped to do that. And I go, and, um, you know, Bishop Stearns has taken, gosh, at this point, 30, 40,000 people to Israel. Now we've taken almost 1,000 pastors or more to Israel for their first trip and first experience. Just a ton and a wealth of relationships and connections and all of that. So we end up, go into the Galilee, and then we go down to Jerusalem and all that. And we get into this space.
So
And I
hold
just
on a
remember,
second. Hold on a second. Galilee. So you're at the Sea of Galilee that Jesus walked on the water.
yeah, if you can't hear from the
I mean,
Lord there, you're dead. We just check your pulse. And
so did you go like touch the water? You're like, I gotta touch this
oh, yeah,
water. I mean,
absolutely.
that's just like huge, for Christians, like boom, like you hear about it, but then you're there. Okay, sorry. So all right, keep going.
No. Yeah, so yeah, we a typical tour, and I've led several tours now. I've been 5 times. I'm taking my kids and my wife this fall in September for about 17 or 18 days. And in leading the tours, I've built a ton of relationships and have the privilege of getting to go back and forth with Eagles Wings. And this last time I was there, the last 2 times I was with Bishop Stearns, and just getting to be there with him is incredibly unique and special because of how the depth of relationship and love and the mantle that's on his life. Just things happen that don't happen when you're not with him, if that makes sense.
Right.
Um, and so anyway, so that first trip in 2016, I'm going for all the Bible stuff, and I'm like, this is going to be cool. I'll network with some cool pastors. And we did. We had some great connections. I still have friends to this day, 8, 9 years later, that I met on that trip. And, some we've gotten to do ministry together. Some we've done podcasting and different things. But on that trip, the 3 experiences kind of culminated up to the last day. So I went to the Western Wall.
Right.
And the Western Wall, it's just a retaining wall. It's not even a wall of the temple.
Right.
It's just that what Herod built to hold this mound so that he could build a temple up on top of it. And, not to get into full history, but, Rome had destroyed the temple that was on top and thrown it down. And you can go and you can still see some of the destruction from that time period while you're there. But so you go to the Western Wall, which is the closest place to where the Holy of Holies would be. It's where you see all of the Jewish people praying and davening and all of that. And it's where, President Trump went and other, dignitaries. I think Milei from Argentina was just there,
Yeah,
and they put the
big
prayer on
story.
the wall. And there's all kinds of traditions around that and whatnot. But I went there and I read the passage in Chronicles where Solomon dedicates the Temple Mount, that space. And the way that the Lord responds to him is he says that my eyes will always be fixed on this place and my ears attentive to the prayers offered in this place.
Nice.
And so and in the Hebrew, it's like in perpetuity, forever. Nothing is going to change that, in other words. And and I grew up in a good Bible believing home and all of that, and I've been a pastor for a number of years. I'm like, you can talk to God anywhere. Like, I don't have to be in a special place. I don't have to any of that. And I don't necessarily have a theological box for that verse. I can just tell you that when I go to the Western Wall, I'm closer than anywhere else on earth. And I don't, again, I don't have chapter and verse other than that portion where
Right.
Solomon dedicates the temple. But when my hands go on that wall and I go to pray there, it's like all the frivolities of prayer fade. And it's like, I pray for my own soul and I pray for my wife and kids. And I just sob. Not like I can't really explain it. It really, I've gone there with like, hey, I have these requests and I'm gonna go in, and every time I get up there, it's like all of the nonsense just fades, and it's like, God, just save my soul, save my kids, like let this be, let be real for them, like that sort of stuff, and it just cuts through, I feel like it's some of the purest, closest prayer, and I wasn't really ready for that.
Okay.
Honestly, Bishop Stearns took us there on Shabbat on the Friday night. We rolled up right before we went to a Shabbat dinner, and we got off the bus, and you have to go through security and a gate, and you're probably a good half mile from the actual wall at that point. And when you go on Shabbat, there's, I don't know, 5, 6, 7,000 people up there
Whoa.
dancing, singing the Psalms.
Wow.
And so we get off the bus, and you can hear this roar of worship just come
Wow.
off the wall. And so immediately you're like, wow, you can just feel the presence of the Lord. And the closer you get to the epicenter, it was quite powerful. And so that experience, I went, wow, there's something special about this place that I don't have a box for. And then, I always in my mind was like, well, the Jews are missing something. As a Christian pastor, they're missing out. They're missing something.
Right.
And so I had this kind of I had looked down on that theology. I had looked down on some of that, not in an active way, but just like, hey, they're missing this piece. And we left the Western Wall and went to this Orthodox Jewish home for Shabbat dinner with 30 pastors.
Okay.
And we go in, and it's through an organization called Shabbat of a Lifetime. I've used them a couple of times. They have host homes, these Orthodox Jewish host homes that will host people that want to experience it from all different faith backgrounds or whatever. And so we go into this home, and they have several children, and the wife's getting everything, and we're told to turn our phones off, and all the things. And I've never been to a Shabbat dinner. And we come in, and they have these guides at everybody's place setting, and you're reading through and enjoying, and you're breaking the bread, and you're blessing the cup, and you're doing the salt, and there's just so much there. And I'm like, and every little bit I'm going, wow, like this is like such a rich meal. But the part that got me was, the husband stands up in front of 30 dudes, right?
Right.
And in front of all of us, he sings Proverbs 31 over his wife in Hebrew, and then
Nice.
blesses each of his kids. And these grown men are sobbing,
Right.
watching this guy bless his children. And he's like, we do this every Friday night. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I didn't have all the things. I felt like, I don't see the Jewish people correctly. I'm missing something. And it was a realization at that Shabbat dinner that there's a piece of my faith that I'm missing. And all this time I thought I had what they need. And perhaps I've been grafted into something, and I need to learn about the root system, right? So that was a huge realization. And those experiences came within a few hours of each other. So it was rather special. And then the culmination of that first trip, our guide took us, and we ended up in the Jewish Quarter. It was the last day. We had a couple hours before we had to leave to head to the airport. And he said, I want to take you to my favorite place in Jerusalem. And I'm like, we've been to the Western Wall. We've been to the Temple Mount. What do you mean your favorite place in Jerusalem? You didn't take us there to begin with. And he takes us to this. It's the little fruit stand. It's actually not there. The last time I was there, it had closed up. It was a halva and fruit stand. And then there was a spot you could get some fresh squeezed juice and that. And there was this playground. And then there was a little piece of the original Jebusite wall from the original city that David had conquered. And I'm like, yeah, we've seen old walls before. I've been in Israel now 10 days. So we're coming to this conclusion. And, there's kids playing everywhere. It's loud. You can see families, sitting. And we get there, and he goes, take this moment in, fellas. And I'm like, okay, all right, there are kids playing, grandmas and grandpas sitting, all that sort of stuff. And it's almost like he said, it's almost like he paid the people to be there. Like he set us up. And he opens the book of Zechariah, chapter 8, and he talks about in those days when Israel returns, the old men will sit with their walking sticks, and the children will play in the streets of Jerusalem again. And again, 30 grown men, got a little dusty in those streets. We were all like, whoa. And then I realized I don't need a commentary. I don't need, I can stand here and see fulfillment with my own eyes. And I don't have to guess. I don't have to wonder what Zechariah meant. Like, there it is in front of me. And so I was wrecked. I drank the Kool-Aid hard and said, I have to come back. And so I spent my plane ride home scheming on, all right, so I had a 3-month series on Wednesday night to teach on my lessons from Israel, and it just became a giant sales pitch for my next trip. I played show and tell with all the stuff I bought, but realistically, I was showing pictures and videos, and I was trying to bring them on the trip with me virtually, so that they would sign up to go. And we ended up in 2017. I led my first trip back with about 20 from our church, and had an incredible experience. It was much different than the pastor's trip. Obviously, the pastor's trip, they condense and put so much in there because they want you to experience everything. I had a lot more leisure and a lot more space, and we had a free day, and we got to take our time. And not to be whatever, I certainly did not have the connections that Bishop Stearns had at the Knesset or in other spaces and places where we'd run into somebody and they'd be like, oh, this is so-and-so from wherever. I didn't have those connections. So The only connection I had in 2017 was Rabbi Pesach. So I met Rabbi Pesach in 2016 on that Israel trip. We did a Bible study in Efrat with the pastors and he offered his business card and said, anybody wants to stay in touch, feel free. So I took the card and contacted him, and I had him speak at our church as I finished my lessons from Israel on Wednesday night. I had him, I think it was sometime in July, he came and preached. I did a Sunday morning and taught on the name of God. It was awesome. We connected, just had this bond. I introduced him to several pastors that were in the region. And then we started, I would see him once or twice a year. He would come through the States. He would always stop at our church. You know, we supported his work. He and I connected for various things. I had him on a previous podcast I had done in Ohio with an entrepreneur at our church. And I think that was maybe the genesis for Shoulder to Shoulder. But over the years, we just spent a ton of time together. Anytime I came to Israel, I tried to have him speak to our group in the first night or two that we were there, because he would always just kind of open that up to the group. And then we launched Shoulder to Shoulder in the
Let's
summer of
talk about
21.
origins of that. So, like, did you just say, "Hey, Rabbi, you interested in doing a podcast with a Christian pastor?" And he's like, "Yes, let's go."
No, it was actually the other way around. It was actually him. He was in the States for something. I don't think he was speaking for a friend of mine, and he had reached out a few weeks earlier and said, "Hey, I know you do podcasting." He goes, "I really think the world needs a Christian-Jewish relation podcast. Would you be interested in seeing if, we have what it takes?" And I said, "All right, well, what will we do?" And we're like, "I don't know." We had no intro music. We didn't know what we were doing. And a friend of mine, we went to his church because he had a little podcasting studio because he did that as part of his church ministry, and he let us use the studio.
Nice.
And so we went in, we recorded 3 episodes. We had no semblance of rhythm or sponsors or any of that stuff. And he just said to me, he goes, "I have a friend, Scott, who produces podcasts. Let's send it to him and he can tell us if it's worth us pursuing. And if it's terrible, he'll tell us. He'll be honest with us." I said, "Okay." So Scott loved it, tweaked a couple things for us. We got some intro music. And then the big thing was just cost to have it produced and edited and put out and all that, unless you're going to do it yourself. But both Pesach and I are incredibly busy, with our schedules and traveling and speaking and church and all that. So Scott took on the production role. And for the first year, the organization that Pesach was leading at the time, the Center for Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation, the CJCUC, they sponsored the podcast and paid for our production costs, which was huge. And we did our best to bring guests on. We tried a bunch of stuff in the beginning, and we weren't sure what was going to land and what wasn't, and we pushed it out via social media. But anymore, we have thousands of listeners every month. It's been amazing to connect and have some of the people on that we've had everybody from Michelle Bachman to Yael Eckstein to Bishop Stearns. We're in the process right now. He's trying to get Ambassador Friedman to come on and a couple different people. We've had some Knesset members. Ohad Tol was just on with us. And so from that standpoint, it's been really, really great. It's been a ton of fun. I've learned a lot.
Is top notch. A lot of people I follow now, I learned about from Shoulder to Shoulder just before recording. Now, I just recorded this morning with Hillel Fold, and he's been on the show.
Hillel's the best.
Yes, he was Hillel on the show 2 times. That's how I heard about him. That's actually how I heard about Robert Stearns, is when he was on the podcast, and then I started following him. And I found out about your podcast, maybe different. I was listening to American Family Radio, and Pesach was doing an interview. And when he was just talking about the prophecies being fulfilled of the regathered nation of Israel, it really kind of blew my mind, because nobody was really talking about that in the Christian sphere. Everybody's talking about the next biblical event, the rapture, the second coming, stuff like that. And nobody's talking about, like, we're in biblical prophecy fulfillment right now. And so that really caught me. And then they mentioned Shoulder to Shoulder in that interview. So I'm just like searching and I found it. And you guys were probably already 20, 25 episodes deep at that point. So I just went back to the beginning and I started listening. And that's what really got me into Jewish Christian relations. And Some of those
Oh,
early
wow.
episodes were so awesome. The one with the rabbi chaplain. Oh man, I was
Oh,
driving,
yeah. Andy
dying,
Tillman.
just talking about how the Jewish rabbis don't do spontaneous prayer and Christians do. And I mean, he just had me rolling in the cars. I told my wife, you got to listen to this. Now she's listened to them all, and it's just been a great ride. You guys' guests are awesome, and I look forward to them coming out every week. And now you guys got a Patreon account, so that's super
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah,
And
so when he left CJCUC, we that sponsorship went away, and Israel 365 has partnered with us. We're their preferred podcast. They promote us on their website, web banner, and stuff, which is huge. Um, but on a financial end, we were like, hey, we have to figure out how we're going to cover production costs because neither of us did the podcast to go broke, and so we just took it to the listeners and said, hey, we're going to do this. You can help us spread the word. And honestly, we love doing the Patreon probably more than we love doing the podcast. We just recorded one this morning. We did Genesis 14, and we're doing another one on Wednesday.
that's
And
awesome.
just getting together and studying the word together and chewing through stuff is just a lot of fun. And it enriches us to be able to do that. So the Patreon account's a ton of fun.
Yeah, and I'm getting ready to scribe. I'm looking forward to it because when I found out you guys are doing chapter by chapter, that was exciting because that's what I do in our church. I'm pastor of a church here in Sioux City, Iowa, and on Wednesdays it's Torah time. So we started Genesis 1 and 1. We try to do a chapter every service, and that's how I preach. I don't prepare sermons. We got 66 books there. And so we're like on Leviticus 13. But when I really like listening to, other people teach, because I didn't, I'm not trying to diss any of the Christian circles. I came up in Christianity, but they weren't like the strongest Torah teachers. You know what I'm saying? But they
Sure.
were so like to listen to like rabbis teach the Torah. It's like boom, it's just deeper. I mean, the book was given to them. They've been studying it for thousands of years. Their insight level is just insane. So I heard when you, a Christian pastor, and then Rabbi Pesach, we're going to break down chapter by chapter. I'm like, I need to get that account because that's going to help me teach on Wednesday night. So that's
Yeah,
really
we
cool.
did Genesis 14 today, and what's fascinating is, Pesach's not obviously oblivious to the fact that there are Christian typologies and parallels and all of that, and so we got to Melchizedek, and
Oh,
I
nice.
pulled some passages out of
Hebrew.
Hebrews chapter 5 and chapter 7, and I said,
Nice.
and he, even before we got on, he was like, hey, I know there's a Christian teaching with Melchizedek. And he goes, bring that in. He goes, that'll be
Cool.
it'll be information for our Jewish audience that don't
Right.
read the New Testament. And so we try and intersperse those sort of things, and it's a lot of
Awesome.
fun because he has the Hebrew insight that yeah, I had to read chapter 14, and it's all these names, and I'm like, I'm butchering these names.
Yeah,
And
yeah, me too.
normally you just read them with confidence and you're
Yep,
fine. But I'm
yep.
like, he knows I'm reading them wrong. And so I paused at one point laughing. I'm like, I'm totally butchering these names, and I know that you know that I'm butchering them.
And that's all you could do. I got one of our members. Pesach actually hooked him up with the Hebrew teacher from Bet Shemesh, Abraham Fisher. He teaches Hebrew. So one of
Ah,
our members studies Hebrew with Rabbi Abraham. And so like I look at him, I'm like, all right, I know you only been doing this like 3 months, but like, I'll say it and I'll say, how would I do? Sometimes he laughs and sometimes he's like, hey, that wasn't bad, Pastor. I'm like, amen. That's awesome. So I want to shift gears a little bit. You
yeah.
know, awesome story, awesome history there. So now you're here. You're in Jewish Christian relations. You're just into, Israel, the people. You have connections. You've been there. It's a big part of your life now. It's changed your life. And now you're on a trip. It's October 7th, 2023. You're getting ready to leave that trip and you're delayed because missiles are flying. So talk us through that story.
Yeah, so we were there with 300 pilgrims. We had 6 buses. Um, Bishop Stearns leading one of the largest trips Eagles Wings has ever done,
Whoa.
and I was leading 2 different buses. I was bouncing between buses wherever he needed me because I had seen the sites. Like I wasn't worried. Like, oh, I didn't get to go here, I didn't get to go there. Like I was fine. Like I've been to those places, I was there to work. And so we had one bus with a group from the Tabernacle, and then we had a second bus that was full of European pastors
Okay.
from all over Europe. And so I kind of bounced between those two buses. And then we had Pastor Miles McPherson from San Diego,
Okay.
former NFL player. He had brought a bus full from his church.
Wow.
Pastor Rusty Nelson from Alabama had brought a bus full from his church. And then bus 5 was several smaller churches that had 3 or 4 people from their church. Didn't have enough for a full bus, didn't have enough because you need about 10 for a full trip, to have something on your own. And so we just kind of paired them up, in several buses together. And so we're managing these, and then we had a bus of Brazilians. And so we're managing all of these buses, and there's a whole administrative team from Eagles Wings. It was really, really well done, but it's a lot of people, and you're maneuvering to different places. We had some incredible experiences and encounters with the Lord and all of that. But we get to the end of the trip, and we're getting everybody to the airport. I remember thinking we had to leave the hotel in the Galilee at like 2 a.m. to get to the airport to leave on time. Everybody's tired. And
Right.
we get to the airport, we check in, we're waiting for the plane. And you had some people were going, we were flying Lufthansa, and we flew from Tel Aviv to Munich and Munich to home. Then you had others that were flying Tel Aviv to Atlanta. You had others that were flying Tel Aviv to somewhere, to California, all over. And so, bottom line, we had about, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 big flights, and then you had several smaller flights. A lot of the European pastors were flying on various different flights to go to flying
Right.
directly to Italy, directly to London, wherever. And so we all get to the airport pretty much at the same time, and our flight was first. We were on the tarmac by about 6:15, 6:30, and
Wow.
we were buckled up and ready to go. And people started getting notifications about the rocket alerts and stuff like that on your phones, and we are kind of looking at it. And the staff wasn't uneasy, but they weren't normal. They were kind of hurrying everybody up,
Okay.
and they were like, "Just take your seats, please get buckled," And you could hear the urgency in their voice a little bit, not panicked, but like, let's not dilly dally. And and then we took off, and we didn't know the extent of what happened. Because we were headed to Munich. And so 4 hours later, we get to Munich, and then we look at our phones and we look at the news and all of that, and we're in total disbelief. But so, yeah, our flight, I think, was supposed to take off at 7:05, took off at 6:55, and we were one of the last flights before they shut the airport down due to rocket fire and
Wow.
stuff like that. But we had probably another 200 or so pilgrims at the airport that they didn't have flights till noon or later. I think it took us about 2.5 days for the Eagles Wings team to get everybody out of country because several of the guys flying to Portugal or flying different places, they just, one of them had to get taken out by a Portuguese military flight
Whoa.
because the commercial flights shut down, and you had thousands and thousands of rockets flying, and all that took place on that day. We didn't realize the extent of it when we left, and I landed back here, in the States. My wife and mother-in-law obviously were very, happy to see us, and we're just watching the news and sitting there like, hoping that all was going well. And we were staying in touch with the people on the ground, but those that had flights at 12 or later, they had to go to the bomb shelters multiple times and just leave their luggage and go. So it was quite an experience for several of our, folks that were with us.
Wow. What an amazing story. And then, I know you start every episode these days, asking Pesach how he's doing because he had 4 kids, active duty. I'm doing the same thing. I'm in contact with all the people that I met. One of them is Yuval Malka. I got to go train with the IDF when I was there. I'm a Krav Maga instructor. And so,
Nice.
my guide, Pesach hooked me up with. He was Orthodox Jewish rabbi. And so it was kind of like a one-on-one trip when I went over. But I said, "You got any connections with IDF or any Krav Maga instructors?" And he just looked at me weird. He's like, "Let me see what I could do." And he ended up getting me in contact with Yuval, who is actually the commander. He's like the head instructor, Krav Maga instructor for the IDF. He's the one that trains everybody. It's just like amazing, like mind blown. Like this is like a big deal. So I got to train with him. So obviously he's, frontline Gaza, and just
Sure.
talking to the guide and just all the friends I made. And, it's just, oh, I'm sure you felt the same way. My heart has just sunk. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, what can we do? We're American Christian pastors. Obviously we could send money to all these great organizations,
Sure.
all these great groups. There's that. But what I wanted to talk to you about is, like, what else can we do? As people who get it, people with moral clarity, practicing Christians, people with good repute, just the people that get it, like Hamas is evil, duh, jihad is evil, duh. Like, there's the people who are with it and want to do something. You've got to have come across things that we could do.
Yeah, I think the biggest things we've been encouraging our shoulder to shoulder audience, and Eagles Wings has been encouraging people to do. Number one, stay informed. Like, you have to actively stay informed, because the media has a narrative, as we all know,
Right?
and so you're going to have to find those pockets and places. Israel 365 has been the spot. Obviously, they're a sponsor of ours. I know that seems like a plug for our sponsor, but realistically, I haven't found. They do a daily email blast that you can get at Israel 365 Action, that gives you all updated, kind of current events, current articles. I follow Jewish breaking news and a couple of those on Instagram and some of those spots to get updated information. Stand With Us is a great spot to get information,
Right?
but you have to actively stay informed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not going to passively happen. Fox and CNN are not just going to magically, report the stuff that's going on the ground.
Right.
Anything that's important, sometimes they'll mention it, but it'll be a few days late. It'll be, article number 27 in a list of, a bunch of other stuff that's more important to their narrative. So I think you have to actively stay informed. I think two, prayer. We've encouraged our listeners to pray the Psalms. We even taught through the psalm that they're using at the fallen soldiers' funerals. Pesach and I did a whole episode on that early on in the war,
Right.
where we went through, like, Psalm 83, if I'm remembering correctly. But going through and praying that, I think we encouraged our listeners to pray through some of the Psalms. It's a great way to show solidarity and support. And then obviously there's tons of organizations out there that are going to request money and going to request those sort of things. Go with the ones that we did a ton of stuff through Eagles Wings. That's where we give all of our Israel support. Some of them are political, some of them are spiritual. One of the reasons that we love Eagles Wings is, I don't know if you know this, but Bishop Stearns, some of those organizations like Kufi and different ones, they all have their purpose,
Right.
and it's not a slam on any of them. They're each in their own lanes, but most of them tend to be politically active, and that's kind of the goal. Where I know Bishop's heart is, hey, we're a prophetic movement that's preparing the way for the Lord, and our job is to fight against anti-Semitism, to stand with Israel because they're the apple of God's eye, and really to be that fulfillment of prophetic scripture that grafted in people to the Jewish root, and not to boast, and to remember that the root upholds you. You don't uphold the
Yes.
root. To use that language from Romans, and so it's one of the reasons I like Eagles Wings. We have a couple feeding centers, one in Tiberias and one in Jerusalem, through Abraham's Bread. I've been to the feeding centers. I've had the chance to meet the staff that work there, and have gotten to see firsthand the people that are being fed. And through a war, they're feeding a lot of people. And there's other great organizations out there, but Eagles Wings obviously near and dear to our heart. Not just because they made an investment and took me to Israel, but just the work that we've seen, and in the churches I've been in, just been an incredible way to partner with your people. And it's a prophetic, spiritual engagement with Israel, not necessarily a political activation. All those prophetic and spiritual things have political ramifications. I don't want to miss that, because I do think we advocate for certain things, and I certainly want to stand on the right side of history when it's not void of politics, but its purpose isn't to get out the vote or stuff like that. Its purpose is far more spiritual, and when it has political ramifications, so be it.
Definitely. Well, that's some great resources. I've donated to Eagles Wings to Abraham's Bread before. I really like that organization. So thanks for that. And because, there's so much out there, and if people aren't in the know and in the realm, they may not know which one to do, and then they may not do
Sure.
one at all. So
Yep.
yeah, giving's always good, and prayer is always good, and being informed is always good. And I do get those daily updates from Israel 365 News. I really enjoy those articles, um, and then I also love their Bible, the Israel 365, the Israel Bible. That's a great
Yes.
one. I really like that one as well. I like all that group is doing. Jewish Christian relations. I mean, it's so awesome that we're in this time period. You know really well that for thousands of years it's been not a good relationship, and it's been on our end. It's been
Yeah.
on the Christian end, and now like this generations of Christians, for whatever reason, end times or whatever, it just seems like God is just allowing us to get it. Like you mentioned, we're the grafted in wild olive branch. We're getting fed by the root. Those are our
Yeah.
big brothers. We serve the same God. We have the same enemies. The people that want to kill them want to kill us. It's so frustrating that people don't understand all this.
When
And
I first met Rabbi Pesach, we had a conversation uh, at my old church, and I didn't know quite what I was saying or asking, because when I came home, I had a ton more questions than I had answers from
right,
Israel that first time. And he said something brilliant, and he's great. He says, when you're in a relationship with somebody, you don't talk about the relationship unless you have a problem. You're just in the relationship. He goes, you go
right,
and get counseling when there's a problem. You go and talk about, and he goes, we just need to be in the relationship. Now there's some hurdles to overcome.
right,
And he makes this point that Christians have to overcome some theological hurdles to be in the relationship. And he goes, and Jews have to overcome historical barriers to the relationship,
right,
because they see history through that lens that, when they say at the Passover Seder, we were slaves in dinner, or we were at the Passover Seder that we were slaves in Egypt,
right,
they were slaves in Egypt, not just my people, not just my ancestors. Like, that identification is personal for them, and is deep. And so when you think about the Crusades and the Holocaust and the Spanish Inquisition and the horrible history of anti-Semitism, even going back to the Reformation with Luther and others, Christians have not been their best friends. It's only been in this last 75 to 100 years where Christians have come alongside, and really in the last 40 years where this kind of Christian Zionist kind of approach has come in and really shifted and challenged theological norms, and people have had to wrestle with things. And it makes people uncomfortable because we like our boxes and we like to know
right.
who's in and who's out. And I'm just much more comfortable in mystery. And I think that allows me to be in this relationship. Like, at some level, I feel like if I have all the answers, I tell our people this all the time. If I have all the answers, you're in a cult. Like,
Yeah,
there should be some stuff that I go, I don't
yeah,
know. God's on the throne. He's going to have to
yeah,
answer that one. Like, I'm going to do my best to read the book and to divide scripture rightly, but there has to be some mystery. Like, God can do what God wants to do, and He's on the throne, and I'm not. And so
yeah,
I think that's a healthy place to be, especially when it comes to how He's going to work out stuff with the Jewish people. Like, we have some understanding with that, and how He's going to work out this kind of end times meshing together of all these things. And it's fascinating, and you can get into so much reading. One of my favorite, I don't know if you've read any of Dr. Daniel Juster's books.
uh-uh.
So he's a messianic
Okay,
uh, Jew, and brilliant guy. And I just was at a conference with his son Ben, and really just fascinating. He's got a whole arsenal, whole library of really good stuff. And one of his books talks about the key to understanding the end times is the Passover, and
okay,
he
wow.
correlates the Passover and all of that. And in one of his books, talking about the end times, I love this, and he says that the two witnesses in Revelation.
Okay,
Some people argue: is it Moses? Is it Elijah? Is it
right,
Enoch? We have all of our arguments. And he makes the argument in one of his books. He says that he actually believes it's the two Messiah peoples proclaiming his coming, the Jews and Christians both preparing the way of the Lord,
oh wow,
from different angles, obviously.
right,
And Bishop Stearns always makes the joke that when Jesus returns, we'll ask him if this is his first visit or his second, and he'll probably say yes, and then leave some mystery to it. But realistically, I think as we look at some of those things, like it just feels like everything's speeding up and everything is coming into this place for God to establish His kingdom fully on the earth with what He's doing in Israel. And there are now more Jews, I believe, in Israel than out of Israel for the first time, thousands of years. They're
Yeah.
more numerous and more prosperous than ever before. So, like, literally, Scripture is being fulfilled
Yeah.
on a regular basis, and it's just incredible to get to live at this time.
And just on that note of Passover and end times, I've been following the stories of the red heifers that have
Mhm.
made it from Texas, which is interesting, from Texas, and they're hidden now in Israel. They have said the name of the city, but I read an article. Actually, I saw a podcast with the Israel guys and with some of the people behind that, and they said they're set for this Passover 2024 on the spot directly across the Eastern Gate to do a sacrifice and get the ashes of the red heifer again. And then I read other articles that was one of the reasons Hamas attacked was because of the red heifer. So, like,
I had seen an article like that. Interesting.
yeah.
I
So
hadn't
this
put
is
that
some
together yet.
this is some serious times we're living in.
Mm.
It sounds weird. I was kind of wanting to be an end time Christian, but then when I read the Bible, I'm like, maybe I don't. I'm not sure if I'm ready to get my head cut off. And,
Yeah.
but we don't have that choice. We're here for such a time as this, and
Yeah.
and I love what you're doing, brother. And I really thank you for coming on. I just really love your work and your ministry and the Jewish Christian relations, and I appreciate what you do and what you've done for my ministry with Shoulder to Shoulder, you and Rabbi Pesach, and just keep going, brother.
Thank you. Honor to be here and appreciate it anytime.
Yeah, and then as we wrap up, how can people follow you, follow any of the ministries you're involved in?
Yeah, so all of my social Instagram is Doug A. Reed. A is for Austin. It's my middle name. It was all that was available. So I went Doug A. Reed on Instagram. I'm Doug A. Reed on X. And then I'm on Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook, Doug Reed, and the Tabernacle in Orchard Park. If you type the Tabernacle in Orchard Park, it's a pretty historic church. It'll come up in your Google search, and you can follow on social or everywhere. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time so much. And as always, everybody, until next time, stay safe.